panel guest is someone many of you know, Bob Budiansky. Bob worked at Marvel Comics for approximately 20 years. He's responsible for much of the writing of the original Marvel Transformer comic and conceived the names of most of the original Transformers, including Decepticon leader Megatron, Autobot medic Ratchet, and Decepticon Ravage. He also wrote the vast majority of the descriptive tech-spec biographies printed on the Transformers toy package that Hasbro produced in the 1980s, giving each figure unique personality quirks. After a long hiatus from the Transformers mythos, Budiansky scripted a new adaptation of the original 1986 The Transformers the Movie for IDW Publishing in honor of the film's 20th anniversary.
Okay, first I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It's a nice turnout. Happy to be here. I'm going to get to your questions eventually, but first I have a little presentation which gives a little background on how I got involved with the Transformers and what I did in the early years, etc. So that might by itself answer a lot of your questions as well as prompt a lot of new questions. So let me begin. First, my name is Bob Budiansky, and I worked on Transformers. So if you're not here for that reason, then you're probably in the wrong room. Okay. So here's what you see. What you see here is the treatment for the Transformers. This is where it all began at Marvel Comics. What happened was Hasbro Toys, following up on their partnership with Marvel in developing G.I. Joe a couple of years earlier, came back to Marvel in 1983 with this new property that they were developing called Transformers. And as probably everybody in this room knows, what Hasbro did was they made some kind of a licensing deal with a couple of Japanese toy companies, Takara and Bandai, and they took the toys that were already being produced by those companies and they rebranded them as Transformers. At that point, they approached Marvel and said, you know, you did such a great job developing G.I. Joe into a storyline and characters for G.I. Joe. We'd like you to do the same thing for Transformers. So I was not involved at any point yet. So what you see here is the first page of the treatment that was written by Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter at the time was the editor-in-chief of Marvel. He did this as part of his day job. He did not get paid extra for it. So he wrote this treatment, which says, "Civil war rages on the planet Cybertron. Destruction is catastrophic and widespread, and yet no life is lost," and so on and so forth. I don't want to read it all day here, but you get the idea. So from this treatment stemmed everything that became Transformers. And the treatment went on, page 2, page 3, page 4. Now you see there's some little bits of editing there. That's my handwriting. So Jim came to me at some point and said, "Oh, we're changing the name of Mount St. Helens to Mount St. Hilary, and we're changing the name of Anti, which was the spacecraft that the Transformers came over to Earth on, to the Ark." So you could see how it was scribbled out and other things were written in. But at this point, I guess I was already involved, and he was dictating to me some changes. And page 5, and page 6, and then you see there's some character development. So you can see that Spike Witwicky was changed to Buster Witwicky in the original treatment. You can see Spike is all crossed out, Buster's written in. Again, these were all changes that were dictated to me by my boss, Jim Shooter. I was a staff editor at the time. And then we have a couple of descriptions of characters, Optimus Prime and Prowl. So anyway, what you're seeing is the original treatment as written by Jim Shooter, as slightly edited by me under his direction. And this is what was turned into Hasbro. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. So you look at that first name at top, Oktar, which is crossed out. Oktar became Starscream. Can you see that? So at this point, things started going off the rails a little bit as far as Jim Shooter was concerned. So what happened was he had written this treatment, and initially Hasbro came to Marvel with its initial line of toy characters, which was 26 characters. I think there were about, I don't know, about 16 Autobots and about 10 Decepticons in the original line. I'm not sure exactly. So he assigned it to a senior editor who had a lot of writing experience, and for whatever reason, Jim Shooter rejected almost everything that senior editor wrote, including Oktar. And then he went down editorial row. We had one office after another of editors, and he was asking one editor after another who had writing experience, "Hey, I need this written these 26 characters. I need new names for 24 of them, and I need character profiles for all of them, and I need you to do it over the weekend. All right, this was the weekend before, I don't know if you guys, we have Thanksgiving in the United States, the last weekend in November. This is the weekend before that weekend. So we had like a 3 or 4 day gap between writing this and turning it in before the Thanksgiving holiday to Hasbro. So anyway, he went down editor's row. One editor after another, including Larry Hama, who wrote G.I. Joe, said, no, I'm not interested, not interested, not interested. Finally came to me. I was maybe about the 4th or 5th choice. And I was known as an editor who drew, not an editor who wrote. And I said, sure, I'll give it a try. So over that weekend, I developed the 26 characters that were the initial line of Transformers. I turned it in Monday, and Jim Shooter was really happy with it, and he turned it into Hasbro, and that's how I got my start on Transformers. And what I'd like to say is, imagine how good it would have turned out if one of those first or second choices had said yes, but I was only the 4th or 5th. Anyway, so here's what I turned in. So there you see my handwritten legal pad Optimus Prime description, which became what was printed on the backs, well, a summary of that, a shortened version of that became what was printed on the backs of the toy boxes, became the bios that were printed in the comic books and that were reprinted in the Transformer encyclopedias or whatever they were called. And this is what I turned in. I wasn't typing. I was just turning in these longhand things, and somebody else would type it up for me. And you can see I gave alternate names. Well, in this case, Optimus Prime was already a name that was chosen by my predecessor, so we kept that one. Here's Megatron, my original Megatron. So you can see that my alternate names were Death Ray, Master, Slag Maker, and I have my entire description of Megatron. Now, Megatron, interestingly enough, as many of you might know, Hasbro rejected that name. And I understood going into this that this was not my toy. This was their toy. They could do whatever they want. But I really liked the name Megatron. So I fought for that one. I said very, very gently to my Hasbro account manager, whoever I was dealing with, said, why do you not like Megatron? He said, well, we think it sounds a little too scary. So again, I gently pointed out to them, well, he is the head of the bad guys. He should sound a little scary. And they bought that argument, so we kept Megatron. So that's how Megatron escaped a quick death early on in his career. And then we move on to Starscream. Well, thank you. Thank you. Let's support Megatron, yes, okay. Thank you for that. Starscream's another one. So, I mean, I just kind of churned these out one after the other. Here's Ratchet. Ratchet was inspired by Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, if anybody ever read the book or saw the movie. And also Ratchet is a tool. So that Ratchet is a medic, so I figured, well, based on a tool and a medic, it has a good sound to it, name it Ratchet. Which one is this? This one is Cat. This one became Ravage. I think it says Stalker here, but it actually became Ravage eventually. Fireball did not stay Fireball. I think it became Shockwave. But you see how these things developed. So I turned these in. A lot of these names, all these names had to go through the Hasbro legal department. So they would reject these names a lot of times because they legally could not acquire the rights to that name. Most of the time they liked my names, but some of the times they had to be changed, so I would come up with another one. And here's Bumblebee. Now, Bumblebee replaced a name called Goldbug, which was eventually used. So Bumblebee was another one where, for whatever reason, Goldbug was not considered a strong enough name. And I looked at the toy. It was a yellow bug. It was a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. And I came up with a name that I thought was evocative of a small car that packed a little sting. And I came up with Bumblebee. And so on. And these are the shortened versions that I came up with that went on the back of the toy boxes. And at the bottom of those, you can see there it says STR2, INT8. Those are the power ratings, which again, I suggested to Hasbro. I said, we're already doing this for Marvel characters. We had Marvel Universe comic books coming out at that time where everybody was given ratings on their different abilities. So why don't we do that for your Transformers as well? So these are the power ratings that you see for, in this case, Bumblebee. And I came up with a chart. That's my original handwritten on graph paper chart of the original 26 Transformers with all their power ratings. And I made the chart because I wanted to make sure that comparatively Optimus Prime, for instance, was a little bit stronger than Bumblebee, let's say, you know. So I wanted to make sure everything was kind of in balance, that certain characters came out on top, other characters came out a little weaker in this area or that area. So that is my original ratings chart, which I have somewhere in my basement. I'm not telling you where I live. And then Hasbro took it and they made a nicer, cleaner version of it. So you can see that, you can read it a little bit better. And those are all the ratings that was then put on the back of all those toy boxes that you had to get that red cellophane out of the box to use to. Now, I didn't suggest the red cellophane. They said, oh, that'll make it more interesting. I just thought it was kind of a nuisance. I don't know how you felt buying those toys, but that was out of my hands. So anyway, those are the power ratings. Well, let's see, what's next? All right, so, and there you go. There's a box. That's the original Optimus Prime. I don't know if it's original, but I found it online. So there you go. Optimus Prime, and there are the power ratings and the summary description that I wrote that wound up on the back of the box. Okay? And then what happened was all you people started buying all the toys, and Hasbro thought, let's make more toys. So every, you know, after the initial rollout of the first 26 toys, Hasbro would come up with a whole new line of toys, and they would send me these product listings. And they'd say, okay, here's what's coming up for next spring or next holiday season or whatever. And they would hit me with these lists of toys that I would have to then name and write profiles for. And as you can see, that's the very initial list for, was it say 1985, I think? And I'd have to come up with something that would, would fit the characters. And by this point, Hasbro probably had run out of their Japanese toy adaptations, and they were making up their own new toys using the same Japanese designers generally. So they would just give me, instead of the toy itself, they would just give me a model sheet of what the toy was going to look like. And here's another list of more characters that I had to come up with names for, and more lists. But you can see the lists were endless. So overall, over the approximately 5 years that I worked on Transformers, 5.5 years, I developed names for about 250 characters for Hasbro, as well as writing their personality profiles. And here's an example of a model sheet. So this would show me what the various robotic forms would turn into. So this is some kind of a lobster creature, all right, in different forms. And here's what he would, I guess, I named it Nautilator, I think. And here's a summary description with the images on it that went on the toy box, and snakeskin, and here's what snakeskin turned into, and so on. And then, aside from all that development stuff, Marvel was also in the business of publishing comic books. So, as probably everybody here is aware, Transformers, given Marvel's lack of confidence in yet another licensed toy product, Transformers only began as a 4-issue limited series. So I was a special projects editor, and because I was already developing the characters, it made sense for me to be the editor of the first four issues of a limited series. So here's issue 1. With issue 5, it became a regular comic book. The sales were through the roof. Marvel realized they had a winner on their hands, and I took over as writer, starting with issue 5. So between issues 5 and 55, I was the writer, except for maybe 2 or 3 issues where we had fill-in issues. So I wrote about 50 issues of the comic book. I did not draw that cover. Mark Bright is the painter who painted that brilliant cover, but it seems to be the most popular cover during my run, from what I could tell. And then I wrote plots. Here's an example. Here's the smelting pool, which is my favorite story of the stories that I wrote. And the way it worked at Marvel is you worked excuse me, in two phases as a writer. First, you turned in a plot, which was like a short story describing the action and the characterizations in the story, and you break it down maybe by page or by every scene or something like that. And then it would go to the artist, and the artist would draw it, and then it would come back to the writer, and you would write dialogue. So there's the cover for Into the Smelting Pool, the plot that you just saw. That's the cover for it. I did not draw the cover. I did design the cover. It went to a different artist who drew it. Typically, covers went through a few phases. So you had an art director or an editor who had some skill to do a design, and then it went to the artist. In my case, I was a writer, but I did have art skills, so even the covers that I did not draw, I only drew a handful. I would often design them for another artist to draw. So this was one of them. And here's another example of a plot. And what I started doing for the sake of the artist, the poor suffering artist who had to draw dozens of these different characters and look at all of this reference at the same time. You can see I started with a cast of characters. So right away, the artist can go through his reference materials and pull out the proper reference for those particular characters. Because unlike everybody in this audience, these artists did not have a photographic memory of what everybody looked like. There's a lot to remember there. Okay, and then that's the story that became out of this one. Now, this story is special to me because it's called Decepticon Graffiti. So in this story, a couple of Decepticons decided to write graffiti all over national monuments over the United States. They spared Canada. They didn't get that far north. So you could see it says humans are wimps. Anyway, so I wrote this story, and as you were aware, comic books get fan letters. So we got a lot of fan letters. I got one particular fan letter that I really valued from Stan Lee. Stan Lee read this story and wrote a fan letter saying how much he enjoyed it, and we printed it a couple issues later. So that's very special. And I was describing before how covers begin with a layout. So this is my layout. This is what I handed in to the editor. I said, here's what the cover should look like. Now, this is called, this story introduced the scraplets. The artist on the interior of the book, even though I described it in the plot, he didn't really have a good handle of what the scraplets should look like. So I decided to draw this cover myself, so I could show him exactly what I was going for. So that's the finished result. That one I drew. So when I felt like it, and I felt I had the time in my schedule, but at the time I was writing Transformers on a monthly basis, I was also a full-time Marvel editor, so it's a lot of work on my hand. It's hard for me to fit in doing artwork as well, but whenever I felt like it, I said to the editor, I'll draw this cover. So I drew about 5 or 6 of them over my run. So scrapped by the scraplers. This is one of my favorite covers that I drew. I thought this was a lot of fun. And here's another example of a layout, and I describe to the artist who all these characters are. And this is a layout that I did, but I did not draw the cover. This went to Jose Delbo, who drew the cover. So you can see how closely he followed my layout in doing the finished product. And that's what the process was in developing Marvel covers back then. And so on. So here's another cover. I had visited the Grand Canyon recently. I said, okay, I'm going to draw this cover. I know what the Grand Canyon looks like now. And I wanted to draw this new character I developed called Circuit Breaker. So that's the cover. I drew this cover as well. And here's yet another one where anytime it had a sexy woman on the cover, I decided, I think I could do this. I don't know. It just happened that way. So this is another cover I drew. And then all of my various profiles were assembled into the Transformers Universe books. First they came out as 4 separate issues, and then they were assembled into one, I guess you would call it a trade paperback nowadays. What else? And then, as Transformers continued to grow in all sorts of directions, and by the way, one of the fun things about writing Transformers was I could grow it in all sorts of directions. There was really no limit. It did not really exist in the Marvel Universe, although there was some minor Marvel crossovers early on. So I could take it to Cybertron. I could take it to other worlds. I could come up with ideas that didn't have to be concerned about whether Spider-Man happened to be in New York at the time, or the X-Men were on the prowl, or some other Dr. Doom was visiting Earth and taking it, or Dr. Doom was trying to conquer the world or something. I didn't have to worry about that. I just had to worry about my own little sandbox to play in, which was a great thing about writing Transformers. So anyway, as things developed, Hasbro came up with new lines of toys, and so I think this is a treatment for development of the Headmasters. Yeah, so this is how I came up with the ideas for expanding the universe into the Headmasters. I didn't come up with the Headmasters, that was Hasbro's idea. And here's my first treatment for Target Masters. Again, expanding the Transformers universe. And here's the 4-issue Headmasters limited series, first cover, which I also drew. So I wrote that 4 issues, took it in new directions, etc. And then this is, and occasionally Hasbro would ask me to write out, if I came up with some big ideas, they would ask me to write it out so they could share it with the animation company Sunbow. So I came up with the Creation Matrix, which they used. I think they may have renamed it into the Allspark or something like that, but it's the same basic idea. So this is November '85, but I had to come up with ideas. The original treatment for Transformers was there was one spaceship, and everybody was aboard that spaceship, and that was it. And it crash landed on Earth, and those guys woke up and they started fighting each other on Earth, and that was it. And then Hasbro said, oh no, that's not it. We're going to introduce 30 more characters that aren't on the spaceship. So I had to come up with new ways all the time of introducing new Transformers characters. Creation Matrix was one of them, where basically robotic creatures could be imbued with life, with mechanical life through the Creation Matrix. The space bridge was another way where people can transport from Cybertron to Earth or whatever. So I had to come up with all different ways to bring in new characters. And finally, this is just a splash page I liked by a former Marvel artist and late Marvel artist, Herb Trimpe, just showing, I think in this case, the creation matrix winding up in Buster Witwicky for a couple of issues. And that's it. End of story.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I assume that answered all your questions, correct? Or are there one or two left over? Anyway, I'm here to answer questions. So anybody wants to? I think I forget your official title.
Panel queen.
Panel queen will handle your questions.
I'm the panel queen. Yeah, in the U.S., I'm the panel president. All right, proceed.
Okay. Of the characters you didn't create, though, which one was your favorite?
The ones I didn't create. The ones I had nothing to do with. If I had nothing to do with it, I have no opinion. I mean, when I was writing Transformers, I wrote almost all the characters I wrote were characters I had something to do with. I did not name Optimus Prime, but certainly he was a favorite, so I'd probably put him up there. But almost everybody else I created. Go ahead.
Hi, I really enjoyed seeing you on The Toys That Made Us
Oh, thank you.
on Netflix. I'm wondering how you thought about your portrayal in the dramatized portion of that show.
Well, there were two betrayals. I'm not sure which one you're referring to. But I'll go through both of them. Okay, so number one, overall, I thought they did a very nice job on that show explaining the whole history. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff, explaining the whole history of how Transformers developed and so on. And they brought me into it a lot, and they had people saying nice things about me, and they gave me a lot of space to say my own whatever, said a lot of the things I just told you guys. But there were two betrayals. I'll tell you about the funny one. The funny one was, so there's a moment where they have an actor recreate young me. The moment, it's sort of like at the top of the Sistine Channel, God touching Adam. Jim Shooter coming to me and offering me the job, and me taking it. And so I'm sitting there behind my desk. They actually asked me to get a photograph of what I looked like back in the 1980s. I found one from my office, and they had an actor dress up something similar to me, and they have somebody playing Jim Shooter who's about a foot too short, because Jim Shooter's like 6'8". And anyway, they recreate this scene where Jim is coming, supposedly recreate it, where Jim comes to my office and offers me the job, and I said, sure, I'll do it. And then as soon as he walks away, I take out my yellow legal pad, they got that right, and I start writing. Now, here's what's wrong with that scene. I accepted that as a freelancer, but I was on my staff job as an editor. So as an editor, one would never, or one is never supposed to, start working on their freelance during office hours. That's what I did over the weekend. So after that appeared, I spoke to, I forget the director or the producer, after I finally watched it. I said, I don't really care. They can't fire me 30 years later, but it didn't happen that way. I took it home and worked on it. Okay. Now, the bigger betrayal, though, was they tried to put a joke in there, which I thought really fell flat and was kind of insulting. And I reamed them out on that after I saw it. I called them up and I said, I'm really upset with this. And I think it skimmed past almost everybody else who might have watched it, so maybe you're referring to that or not, I don't know. But earlier in the show, they had Larry Hama, who developed G.I. Joe, quote himself about anybody, he said, the quote, I'm approximating it, was something like, at Marvel, anybody who worked in a toy book was considered a loser. Now, he's entitled to his opinion. I looked at it as anybody who got work at Marvel should consider it as an opportunity. The losers were the ones who couldn't get into Marvel. And even those people didn't always lose, but eventually they persevered, they got in. But I looked at it, and as I explained earlier, I was on editor's row. I was the fourth or fifth choice. I got this great opportunity to show that I could write, and I took it. So again, Larry Hama quoting, his own quote about what he's free country. I have nothing against him. He can say whatever he wants to say about himself. Anybody who takes a toy book is a loser. That's his opinion. So at some point in the Toys That Made Us, they show me sitting on a stool like a deer in the headlights, and they run his audio crawl under me. Anybody who takes a toy book, who writes toy books is considered a loser. And I was furious. Now, I've done panels like this, and I've done interviews, and I've done blogs, and I've done all sorts of things over the years. And one thing I've learned is to control what I say in public. I didn't say that. So I was furious. And they said, well, we were trying to just show how ironic it was that you're just the opposite of a loser, that you became so successful doing this. And yeah, okay, it was a stupid joke. It did not deserve to be in there. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that's where I felt betrayed.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So the work that you did that weekend was a job at that point. You're working for a company to make money and to sell toys, but the work that you did influenced the course of the life of everybody in this room.
And I will apologize for that right at this
Well-
moment. I am sorry. Okay.
I'm very popular with my young son
All right,
because
okay.
we can relate with this. You've
Yeah.
affected that. Do you realize, or do you wake up in the middle of the night and realize that you've steered the course of popular culture for millions of people? What does that feel like?
I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, as the recreation director to my town, I have to get a press release out the next morning to somebody, or I have to schedule the baseball teams that are, asking me repeatedly for their reservations for the fall. So, no, I don't think about this so much. I mean, I do think about it when I come to these conventions and when I communicate with people for, like I said, I get interviewed and all that, and it's wonderful that so many people got so much out of the work I did so many years ago. I'm thrilled to be part of this. I'm thrilled that you're all here and that you're interested in what I have to say. It's wonderful. But it's my past. I'm more concerned about, like, got to bring the dog to the vet today. I got to do, I got to go to the supermarket. I was like, my life has moved on. But thank you for, pointing that out. That
Millions of people.
well,
Thank you for that work.
maybe we should start a movement and take over the world or something. I don't know.
Thanks. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Again, thanks so much for being here. It's always so awesome to hear, stories of how the stuff that we've loved for so long came to be. And you mentioned earlier that the name Ratchet was partially inspired by Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I'm wondering, are there any other ones that kind of spring to mind immediately that were inspired by either movie characters or pop culture or book characters or anything like that?
Yeah,
would be
there's a few. Okay, so in the 1960s, there was a cop TV show called Ironsides about a police officer who was limited to a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. He was crippled. So that's where I got Ironhide from.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And I'm trying to think. Well, I was given three in the initial line. I was given three Decepticons. They were all basically the same jet, just differently painted.
Yeah.
So I just came up with words that evoked something about the heavens, flying or something up there above us, and something that sounded dangerous. So I came up with Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp. And I just thought, the juxtaposition of heavens and danger, made them sound like they were bad guys. So I came up with words all different ways. Megatron, Tron was a very common suffix for anything electronic. It's even in, it's Cybertron. It's it's not unknown. Mega just meant big, but back in the 1970s, mega had a connotation of nuclear war because nuclear bombs were considered, were measured in megatons. So megaton to Megatron, that's why Hasbro thought it sounded too scary, because back then, megaton was a very scary concept. Nowadays, mega is associated with megabytes, which is what you have on your computer. It's like no big deal. Mm-hmm. But it just still means big. Yeah. And I just thought that it just rolled off the tongue so well, Megatron, so I like the sound of that. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but I don't want to be here all day
Yeah.
rattling them off.
No, that's really cool. The Ironside one, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate
Sure.
it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi,
Hello.
Bob.
Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. Very much in the same vein, we talked about Ironhide and Ratchet, Seekers, Jazz, Bumblebee. If there are any other characters that you can think what you were trying to evoke when you came up with the name, or how you came up with the name, so Wheeljack, Blue Streak, Hound, Mirage, Trailbreaker.
Well, Wheeljack's a good one. I think I made Wheeljack a mechanic, right?
That's right.
So he fixed the other Autobots. So the whole idea of jack of all trades came to mind, and just putting wheel in front of it to bring it into the idea of autos and cars, and so that's how I juxtapose those two. What was it? Give me another one or two that you mentioned.
Trailbreaker, Hound.
Trailbreaker and Hound.
Sunstreaker.
Trailbreaker and Sunstreaker were just like, I was just reaching for something, just something, trail, you're dealing with autos, characters that turn into autos. So I'm looking for some words that have something to do with driving on the road without being literally drive on road, So Trailbreaker gives you the idea that, he's unstoppable, he perseveres, he pushes through. Sunstreaker, just streaking means, moving fast. And sun is a positive image as opposed to thunder, thundercracker. Thundercracker is on one side, Sunstreaker on the other. They're almost kind of like opposites in the way they sound to my ears. So I was playing with a lot of words. As I told you before, and I haven't shared this with everybody else, but I used to do a lot of crossword puzzles. I still do a lot of crossword puzzles. So it helps me with a lot of vocabulary, I guess.
Do you remember anything about Huffer? Because Huffer was one of the first ones I had as a kid. How you came up with that name?
I don't remember
that's
Huffer.
okay.
And Huffer might not be one of mine. You know what? I think Huffer I might have inherited. I don't know. I have to go back at my notes. I don't know about Huffer.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hiya.
Hello.
Yeah. I myself am a writer, and I've always wanted to write for Hasbro and the like. Do you have any tips for how? I know.
I am so far removed from that. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, first of all, I didn't write for Hasbro. I wrote for Marvel Comics. It was an assignment from Marvel that eventually, so Hasbro never hired me, but Hasbro approved my work. So it wasn't like I went to Hasbro and knocked on their door and said, hey, can you hire me? I don't know how to apply for a job so many years later to Hasbro.
Well, how would you? Well, are there any tips for, starting out in writing in general?
Yeah. I mean, these days things have changed so much from when I was starting out. There's so many more ways to get your words out there. I mean, obviously there's the internet. People have all sorts of print material that they put on their sites or they're getting their, that's the way I think a lot of people start up. They start up with little publishers, self-publishing, publishing on the internet, and then they have a body of work that they can show to a more major publisher. But that's just, I'm so vague on that. I can't really tell you exactly how people do it these days.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Seeing how the brand has developed over the last 35 years and obviously being there for the beginning, have you ever thought about maybe what could have been if you had done it differently? Or have you ever seen spins that people have put out and said, that's a really neat twist on what I did?
Well, there's an assumption in your question that I follow everything that's happened on Transformers since I left the book. Sorry to deflate you there.
No, that's fair.
But the truth is, and I try to, I understand that I'm saying this as kindly as possible. When I worked on Transformers, it was a job. So I understand that from your perspective, most of you anyway, I think, you came at it as somebody who loved it as a fan, and you became immersed in the whole world of Transformers and the ever-expanding worlds that happened beyond my tenure on the book. But once I was done with the Transformers, I didn't stick to it. I didn't read the books. I never watched, even while I was working on Transformers, I never watched the animation, not one episode. I did watch a few of the live-action movies, more recently, so I'm a little bit aware of that. Occasionally, what'll strike me is that reminds me of what I was trying to do in the comic book, especially the first movie, the first live-action, and the more recent Bumblebee. And the ones in between I won't talk about. And so that's where I can connect to what's going on these days. But I just don't follow what's been happening for the last, 1989 through today, other than a couple of the movies. Now, having said that, understand that when I worked on the book, I loved working on the book most of the time, and I tried to do as good a job as I could. So maybe it came out that way, that I was really immersed in this and loved this world, which I did at the time. But then I moved on, and I did other work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Thanks again for being here.
My pleasure.
First of all, I want to thank you for developing some minor off characters, such as Scrounge.
Yes, I hear he's a fan favorite over the years. Yes.
Yeah, that was great. It was so moving, and I understand how you can't do necessarily. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not understanding this correctly, but I think it's obvious that you can't do that with a character who's established because he dies at the end of the two-parter.
Right.
And it's like, no, you need to keep him around.
He died in the first part.
Yeah, you're okay.
At the end of the first.
Yeah.
Sorry, I gave away the ending to the first part. So. Spoiler alert! Too late. Anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, did you name Blue Streak?
Yes.
Okay, and obviously I'm guessing he was blue.
Yes.
At the time you named him. What was your reaction when? Oh yeah, but by the way, the guy you named Blue because he's blue and he has blue in his name. He's not. He's no longer blue.
My reaction is, I didn't know that till now.
Okay.
Oh my God, I'll have to change it. I don't know. You know, Hasbro could do what they want with the toys. I can't. I mean, remember Bumblebee was originally named after a Volkswagen Bug, and then they turned him into a Camaro, I think, in the movies.
Right.
So if they had presented me with a yellow Camaro originally instead of a yellow Bug, I don't think I would have come up with the name Bumblebee.
Right.
Because Bumblebee evokes a bug, not a Camaro. So anyway, it's their toy. They do what they want with it. But I will say, what was the other one you mentioned? Blue Streak and
Scrounge.
Scrounge. So I will say on that story, I don't know how many people here are familiar with that story, the Into the Smelting Pool story. So Scrounge tragically but heroically dies at the end. So if any of you have ever seen the movie Gunga Din from the 1930s, it's the same ending. That's where it's inspired. That's what inspired the ending of that story.
So 2 spoilers.
2 spoilers, yes.
Thank you, Bob.
Gunga Din doesn't make it. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Bob. First,
Hi.
I'd like to say it's an honor to meet you.
Oh, thank you.
And second, my question would be, when you wrote the Transformer bios, did you base them off any of your friends or family members?
Probably not. I don't think my friends and family members were that interesting. But I did base a bunch of them off of like fictional characters. So if I saw a movie, I might not come out and say, just like Indiana Jones, this character does this, that, and the other thing, but I might have gotten some aspects of a character from a movie character because, action movie characters are larger than life. Most of us, luckily or unluckily, don't live such exciting lives, and so it's a lot easier to take something off of a fictional. Like I said earlier, I mentioned Ironhide. Yeah. Ironhide came from a police detective called Ironsides that was on television. So I was inspired by a lot of different sources. It was a good question. I mean, I was. Especially with so many characters I had to develop, I was looking for ideas from everywhere, from any kind of fiction I was exposed to, anything that was on the nightly news. I mean, I don't remember all of it, but I do remember, trying to be like a sponge and absorb whatever I could to transmit into these characters I was developing.
Thank you.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
So I was listening to your story earlier about how they almost weren't going to approve Megatron because they thought the name was too scary.
Yeah.
And it made me think, about 4 years later, there was a 2-headed Decepticon dragon with the absolutely amazing name of Sinner Twin.
Yeah.
If Megatron was too scary, how did that one get through?
No problem. I mean,
Really?
you also have to remember, so when Hasbro started out with Transformers, it was a new product to them. I don't remember, like Allison Shinners, who was also in that TV show, The Toys That Made Us, she was the product manager who I think broke the news to me that they didn't like Megatron initially. And so I don't know where I don't know what Allison's job was before that. She might have been working on dolls or something. I don't know. But this was like new territory to some of them. So I think once they became aware that Transformers was this universe of these big, powerful creatures, robotic creatures, just pummeling each other, I think it expanded their consciousness a little bit. That you had to allow for other ideas. Everything couldn't be sweetness and light. You had to allow for some other ideas to enter into this world. So Sinner Twin was not a problem.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Bob.
Yes.
Now you came up with personalities for characters. Like, what would you do if you can't think of a personality and you don't want to repeat a personality for a new character?
I would keep working. That's called writer's block. You just keep working at it. I mean, I don't remember. Look, the point is I got to write everybody I had to write. I didn't give up and say, well, I did give up eventually, but I gave up the book. But I did say, even after I gave up the book, Hasbro begged me to continue writing some of the later toys that they were rolling out, some of the later bios, but they liked what I was writing. So I continued working on that for a little while longer. But you know, it's just as a writer, you just have to keep pushing it. You just have to keep you just keep persevering. You look for other sources of inspiration. You know, one thing I've mentioned in many interviews, but a lot of people don't know, is my background is civil engineering. So I have a bachelor's in civil engineering. I dropped out of grad school in transportation engineering to work at Marvel. Good college advice, people. Anyway, so I had a lot of technical jargon in my head rattling around, left over from taking physics and engineering and chemistry and all these other science-oriented classes. And I was able to include that into a lot of the stuff I wrote, which helped me expand what maybe another writer would have written, who didn't have that kind of science background. So that was a really big help. Early on, after I'd written, you know, several dozen of these bios, I had a meeting with some Hasbro executives, and one of them said, "Were you ever in the military?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, because you have all of this, you know, militaristic science jargon in all your descriptions, and we really like it. Where did you get that from?" I said, "Well, I was a civil engineering major, so it came in handy." So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay. There's one character who's been out for a while. His name is Skyfire, but then there's a lot of confusion because a lot of iterations call him Jetfire. Can you
I can't explain it. You're asking, I named him Jetfire. What happened to him in other iterations had nothing to do with me. So
Okay, because in the show he was called Skyfire.
So, so what happened in the development of all of these character profiles is that I would come up with a profile, which you saw some examples of. It would get typed up, it would get approved by Hasbro. They would take those, their account executives would take that, and they would hand it over to, send over copies to Sunbow Productions, which was the animation studio. What Sunbow did with them after that, I have no idea. It was out of my control. They did their thing, I did my thing. So if they wanted to change it from Jetfire to Skyfire, they could. Sometimes there was a little bit of a lost in translation problem, because at times Hasbro would send out stuff to Sunbow, and then we would change it. So, like, for instance, Spike Witwicky was Buster Witwicky was originally Spike Witwicky, but Hasbro asked for it to be changed to some other name, which we came up with Buster. But I believe in the animation he remained Spike. The change didn't make it over there in time. So I don't know what happened. You know, it had nothing to do with me. I was not in the middle of that communication.
Thank you. Bob, it's wonderful to see you again. I think the last time I saw you was back at Disney World in 2010 when you were one of the first inductees into the Hall of Fame.
Oh,
that was,
glad you were there.
Yes.
That was a fun evening.
Yeah, that was probably the most expensive convention of all time, but yeah, it was a good one.
Not for me, but okay.
Yeah. This is a non-Transformer-related question. What are your favorite books? What kind of books do you enjoy? Are you a fiction consumer, or do you prefer non-fiction?
I like historical fiction. I'm reading a book called Munich right now, which is by Harris, Robert Harris, I believe. I like Ken Follett. Yeah, I like that's the kind of stuff I like to read. You know, I like Michael Crichton when he was around. Yeah.
It's kind of creepy how Michael Crichton books still keep getting published long after his death.
Well, he's a good writer.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I like what he does, because he takes the real world and he injects just a little bit of science fiction in it, just enough to make it interesting. So I think, you know, and he's very, you know, and his books are like, they roll along like roller coasters. They move from chapter to chapter. They're a good writer.
Have you ever considered trying your hand at writing a novel sometime?
It's a, you know, the thought passes through my head, but it's quite a skill. It's a real challenge. So I give all credit to those people who can write successfully and find an audience. I wrote comic books, so that's as far as I made it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
We are at the 10-minute mark. So if you've been thinking about getting a question, but you're working up the nerve, now's the time to do it. Go for it.
Come on up.
So, sorry if you've been asked this one a lot, but
okay.
Which one do you consider Rumble, and like which one do you consider Frenzy? Red or blue? Yeah, you know.
Well, if I had my Transformers Universe book here, I could just point you to the pictures, but they are different. I think they're identical, except they have different colors. So, I would refer you to that reference material. That's all I could tell you. Anything else?
No, just kind of wondering.
All right, last call.
Come on up.
Come on up.
In the original miniseries, when Spider-Man was introduced into Transformers, whose idea was it to separate Marvel and Hasbro, the characters?
Well, when you say who, what do you mean whose idea
Like
was to
taking
separate it?
the superheroes out of the Transformer fiction.
Well, okay, so here's what was going on. So the first 4 issues of Transformers, the miniseries, we had 3 different writers, and there was a reason for that because nobody could get a handle on writing that book. It was too, it was too many characters. It was, it just was a mess. So as the editor, I became almost like dictating the plots to the writers to get them to get from, page 1 to the last page because they were just struggling. So we went through a bunch of writers, and the third writer, I believe, was Jim Salicrup, who coincidentally was the editor of Spider-Man at the time. So he thought it would be a good idea to help sell more books to feature Spider-Man as a guest star. I said, sure, if you want to put Spider-Man in there, that's a great idea. Now, here's the interesting thing. Hasbro rejected it. And you could say, why would and I went to Hasbro, I said, he's our #1 character, he's our flagship character. We're giving you the opportunity to promote your new product by putting Spider-Man on the cover, and you're rejecting it. The reason they rejected it was, at the time, Marvel had a deal with another toy company to produce action figures. And among those action figures was Spider-Man. So Hasbro looked at it as, well, you're helping to promote our rival toy company by selling Spider-Man. So we came up with, well, not we, but Jim Salicrup came up with an idea. We had a new Spider-Man costume that had just been recently introduced, the black and white costume, which was not among the toy licenses that the other company was doing for action figures. So we said, okay, if we put him in a black and white costume instead of his red and blue costume, would that be okay? And he said, oh, okay. So that's how Spider-Man wound up. But looking back, it's a big mistake because as a result, Spider-Man is owned by Marvel, and the Transformer comic books, which get reprinted constantly by other publishers that are not Marvel, then they have to deal with like this one issue where Spider-Man appears. And I don't really know how they do. I think sometimes they've gotten permission to use those issues in reprints, and sometimes they haven't. I really don't follow it. But it does create that kind of... So we kind of avoided that in the future. There was a couple of other minor Marvel references in future issues. There was one reference, I think, with the Dinobots to the Savage Land. Savage Land is a Marvel concept. And when I introduced a character called Circuit Breaker, I didn't feel so generous as to create a character that has potential beyond Transformers and give it to Hasbro. So Circuit Breaker was introduced in one panel of a Marvel comic book called Secret Wars, so she could be Marvel copyright and not Hasbro copyright.
Okay. And a follow-up question. G.B. Blackrock, was he originally based on Tony Stark?
No. He was based on, I think I had a vague idea of like Rockefellers, like this oil executive. No, not so much Tony Stark. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
And his name came from a friend of mine. I have a friend named Gary Bennett Schwartz. Schwartz translates to black. So I named GB, Gary Bennett, Blackrock. And Rock is from Rockefeller. Yeah.
Hey, I know you mentioned that you were not watching the cartoon whatsoever, so was there any point where Hasbro was forcing Marvel to incorporate like some of the similarities, like obviously the death of Optimus Prime or things like that?
No.
And how was that was another question, how's the atmosphere at Marvel towards the end of the run in North America? Because I know in Japan it continued on until 1990s.
Wait to the atmosphere. Like Marvel produced, dozens of comic books a month, and Transformers was just one of them. It wasn't, and by the end of its run, it was dying. And they, like when a book is not selling, Marvel doesn't really care so much. It's like they're just looking, okay, when can we end this? When can we come to a clean and cut ending? Now, I exited with issue 55, and I think the run was ended with issue 80, I think. I wasn't involved by issue 80. I don't know what was going on, So I was, I'd already stepped off the scene.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Good. Okay, one question. I have no idea if this was asked already or not. But, okay, so you were responsible for making the Creation Matrix idea. And then that happened in the comics for a while. But there was no Creation Matrix at all in the cartoons until the 1986 movie, when suddenly it's like, oh, Matrix of Leadership.
Yeah.
Did you have any influence on the Matrix of Leadership as it played out in Transformers movie?
No.
No? Okay.
No,
So-
nobody from the movie ever consulted with me on anything. I mean, they had reference materials as far as the books I had written. Whether they read them or not, I don't know.
Okay, cool. So they probably just took your idea and
Yeah, and that's fine. I
played
mean,
with
that's what those ideas are out there for, so they
Yeah.
could, develop the universe whatever way they want. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. And thanks for everything.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, because, yeah.
Thank you for having me here.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been a really good panel. I'm happy that I was here to answer your questions, and I'll be at my table today and tomorrow, so feel free to come by if you have more questions, want autographs, I have prints if you want to buy, come by and chat, okay?
Oh,
Good seeing you all.
Always a delight. Thank you.